Hi, my name's Phil. I like to talk about politics. So, Tommy Robinson, which is the adopted name of Stephen Yaxley-Lennon, and I should probably tackle that issue first. So, whenever I have to discuss this particular monster, some people point out that I should call him by his real name, but then I draw parallels with Muhammad Ali. When he changed his name from Cassius Clay, decent people were fine with it and started calling him by his new name. Racists refused and made his name effectively a tool of oppression. So, if one man should have the right to change their name, why not another? Yes, Robinson changed his name despite his stated reason to avoid sounding a bit posh. You know, he presents himself as a hard-done working class bloke and needed a name that reflected that. But if he wants to be called Tommy Robinson, then of all the monstrous things this man has done that I'm about to criticise for him, that is not one of them. So, Tommy Robinson has just been jailed. Again. On this occasion, it was for illegally broadcasting to Facebook Live from inside a courtroom where a criminal trial was taking place. The criminal trial was into a grooming gang in Leeds. The judges explained that the reckless behaviour could have encouraged vigilante action. But it actually could be worse than that as well. This was not the first time he's broadcast a trial in this way. On the first occasion, judges were appalled and tried to explain the problem is this sort of action could lead to the trial collapsing. You know, trials have to be conducted fairly. This is why there are rules about what can and cannot be reported. If you cannot guarantee a fair trial, then you cannot hold that trial. And so the very people that Robinson says he's campaigning against would go free. But he doesn't care about justice, only shouting and making money. Now, don't get me wrong, I think he's a racist as well. That's certainly how he started out, but I think he enjoys the money that comes from his exploits and has become increasingly desperate since social media platforms made it more difficult for him to generate his revenue in the normal way. And on this latest conviction for contempt of court, true to the nature of Robinson and his supporters threw missiles in the form of bottles and cans at the police outside court in response. Naturally, it would be bottles and cans because these people are nothing more than beer-fueled thugs, angry at the world for their own sad, desperate lives. Except, of course, there is nothing sad or desperate about Tommy Robinson himself. This man, who tries to model himself as an ordinary working bloke, has put up his house for sale, for example. A nice little 4-bedroomed house with a hot tub in the backyard. This poor, struggling, working-class bloke is having to let it go to make ends meet for a snip at nearly £1 million. The fact is that he does what he does largely because it allows him to make a lot of money. He's like Nigel Farage without even the pretense of not being racist. Not that Robinson himself considers himself a racist. He defends himself by saying that he refused to join the BNP because they wouldn't allow his black friends into it. But racism is not just about the colour of someone's skin. It's a hatred of people because of the group you place them into. Tommy Robinson doesn't have a problem with black people, but he hates Muslims. And this is what drives everything he does. He grew up in a part of London where Islamic tensions were rife due to an extremist group that was active in his hometown of Luton. And I suppose, I say London, everything is London around that area for me. And I suppose growing up in a town where your only knowledge of Muslims is seeing Islamic terrorist groups causing trouble, that is bound to colour your views, I suppose. But what started out as a concern about Islamic extremism turned into hatred for all Muslims, for at least those living in Europe at any rate. He pointedly makes a distinction between being Muslim and being European, for example, as if it's impossible to be both. He uses the same fear tactics that Brexiteers used in trying to whip up Islamophobia. He claimed that Muslims were going to outnumber what he called Europeans very soon. He talks about Asian sexual grooming gangs in an attempt to project the view that Muslims inevitably end up doing this, as if it's part of their culture, completely ignoring the white sexual grooming gangs that are also prosecuted on a regular basis. He describes Muslims as predisposed to violence because of the Quran, which for anyone who actually knows any Muslims knows is a complete nonsense. And if he thinks violence is such a vice as well, you have to wonder why his and his supporters are so quick to turn to violence themselves as their only form of protest. Indeed, he's been convicted several times for violence, as well as possession of drugs offences, threatening behaviour, mortgage fraud, and travelling on someone else's passport in order to circumvent United States entry rules. Apparently, they're not too keen on violent white Islamophobes entering their country, but then that was before Trump became president, I suppose. And so a man who had a good future as first an engineer and then a plumber decided instead that money was easier to make by pursuing an angry them and us rhetoric, playing on people's tribal fears and asking the us contingent to send him donations to fund his work. Work that is paying him a fortune and all he has to do is shout a lot. wave his fists about and spend the odd year at Her Majesty's pleasure. He's also been linking up with similar people and groups around the world, just as collaborations are good for businesses with the potential to share one another's customer base, so it seems it's also profitable for right-wing lunatics as well. With the Canadian Islamophobe Ezra Levant, he employed Robinson. Old Tommy was making over £100,000 a year, and his role for this wage? To produce inflammatory videos designed to provoke fear and anger against fictitious conspiracies. After leaving this role, Robinson continued to use the same techniques himself to promote his rhetoric, creating videos set up to try and purport to show white people being attacked by Muslims, for example. It included one film where an Asian driver caused death by dangerous driving whilst under the influence of drugs and was jailed. But Robinson presented it as a deliberate act of terrorism. And he also tries to sow mistrust in the police by saying that they're covering all of this up and that this is one incident is just the tip of the iceberg. And this is a source of revenue that has since become more difficult for him to use after his expulsion from social media platforms, but he still seems to find no shortage of people willing to throw money at him if only he'll keep on shouting about things. And it's often easy to see Tommy Robinson as just a thug who deplorably makes money from his venomous actions, but he is actually a real danger to society. His videos and speeches actually work. He convinces people that there is this conspiracy at work and that everyone is in on it. The police, the government, the courts. In fact, anyone who says that he's wrong is in on this Islamic conspiracy. It is no different on any level to the paranoia that Hitler and his followers had regarding the Jewish community. In the recent European elections, he stood as an MEP candidate as part of in part of England where support for this sort of rhetoric was judged to be strong. He did not do well. He didn't even get enough votes to get his deposit back. It was a very humiliating defeat. And you might look at the results and laugh, delighted that there are not actually that many people who support his sort of hatred. But it might not be that simple. Remember, in those European elections, in those sort of parts of the country, the Brexit Party were cleaning up. So the sort of people that might have voted for Tommy Robinson were potentially actually just voting for the Brexit Party instead, who are a far more coordinated group of xenophobes who are not seen as drunken thugs. So that's my views on the Tommy Robinson jailing there. It is going to keep happening. The same cycle is going to continue. Let me know what your thoughts are in the comments below. I hope you found the video interesting. If you did, don't forget to click the like button, subscribe for further content, and until next time, I'll see you later.